Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Huo Yuhao went deep into the city once he entered, and he found a hotel in a relatively bustling area to stay. He didn't have any leads right now, so he could only find a place to stay. How easy could it be to find Tang Ya and Ma Xiaodao inside the Heavenly Soul Empire and the Sun Moon Empire? He wasn't hoping that he could just find them here, but searching for information inside a large city like Heaven Do City was a lot easier. He was almost certain that there were evil soul masters in Heaven Do City. The Holy Ghost Church wouldn't relinquish the opportunity to control such an enormous city, and even if they couldn't control it entirely, they would keep the city within their grasp. Huo Yuhao and the Ice Bear King had something to eat after finding a place to stay, but this meal stumped Huo Yuhao. The reason was simple: the Ice Bear King's appetite was far too terrifying. One could imagine, he had a frame like a mountain, so how much did he have to eat to be satiated? Everyone would find it very suspicious if Huo Yuhao just allowed him to eat as much as he wanted inside the restaurant. Fortunately, the Ice Bear King had stored a lot of energy inside his body, and he could still sustain himself for many days even without eating. This would give Huo Yuhao enough time to find a solution. Huo Yuhao brought the Ice Bear King out of the hotel after eating dinner. Resolving this glutton's food issues had top priority. At the same time, he wanted to observe what was happening right now inside Heaven Do City. There were all sorts of surveillance soul tools in the skies above Heaven Do City. Huo Yuhao didn't want his behavior to be too eye-catching, and he spread his spiritual detection around him as he walked the streets. He tried to maintain his sensitivity as much as possible during the process. In the end, even if his spiritual power was discovered, they couldn't lock down on his position unless his opponent was also a soul master with formidable spiritual power. Huo Yuhao wasn't that concerned about his safety. With the Ice Bear King beside him and in addition to himself, almost nobody could capture him unless there were many powerful individuals from the Holy Ghost Church present. Heaven Do City was still busy and bustling late into the night. People thronged around along the busy streets, and one could hardly tell that this was a city that had experienced the flames of war not too long ago. The main streets of Heaven Do City were being repaired, and some soul lamps were being installed. There was no doubt that the Sun Moon Empire was still following through with their plan of penetrating the city with their technology and soul tools. The Heavenly Soul Empire's citizens were undoubtedly full of hatred towards the Sun Moon Empire. However, as long as they got used to all that new technology, and the core of those soul tools technology was within the Sun Moon Empire's grasp, then the Sun Moon Empire wouldn't be afraid of the Heavenly Soul Empire's aristocrats, or citizens resenting them. Given enough time, the Heavenly Soul Empire would be slowly assimilated. Huo Yuhao walked the streets as he sighed inside. The Sun Moon Empire's strategy was just too ruthless. They were saying that they were serving the citizens, and nobody could say anything against them. It was much later into the night, when the lights along the streets began to dim, before Huo Yuhao took the Ice Bear King back to the hotel. Huo Yuhao had spent almost 4 hours scouting around, and he had already discovered some information about what he wanted to know. "I'm hungry, grandfather," the Ice Bear King said to Huo Yuhao with an aggrieved look on his face. Huo Yuhao laughed bitterly and said, "You're not the only one who's hungry. Those two fellows are hungry too." He was naturally referring to Big Mao and Second Mao, who, after sleeping for a couple of hours, had awoken in the spectral demiplane. Huo Yuhao immediately communicated with them with his spiritual power after they woke up, and told them to play around inside the spectral demiplane for now. He instructed them not to go too far beyond the borders that he had established. Occasionally leaving the borders for a few moments wouldn't be a problem, but they were so filled with liveliness, and Huo Yuhao would already be happy if they didn't cause trouble with the undead. But the biggest problem in the spectral demiplane was that there was nothing to eat. Those two fellows fooled around for a while, but then expressed to Huo Yuhao that they were hungry. Feeding 3 bears is truly a difficult task. Huo Yuhao laughed bitterly on the inside. Fortunately, he had managed to find a way to resolve their appetites when he was out. At least, he could deal with today, and everything else would have to wait. The night was even darker outside. Huo Yuhao extinguished the lights before he took the Ice Bear King out of the hotel once more. This time, Huo Yuhao concealed them both entirely through imitation. "Grandfather, this ability of yours is fantastic. It's most suitable for surreptitious activity," the Ice Bear King said excitedly. Huo Yuhao was almost rendered speechless. "Do you know how to talk? What surreptitious? Your grandfather is taking you to eat." Huo Yuhao could only accept that title now, as he was used to the Ice Bear King calling him that. Huo Yuhao confirmed the right direction once they left the hotel before he accelerated. There were many surveillance soul tools in the sky, but they were inside a city, not the wilderness. Even if oscillation detectors discovered that there were two people moving around, nobody would be alerted. Huo Yuhao realized, when he was investigating before this, that the surveillance soul tools above the city were mostly for monitoring. There were oscillation detectors and thermal detectors, but they weren't rotating around, and were evidently used for responding to contingencies. Huo Yuhao rapped through and around streets and alleys as they arrived near the southern city gate. Huo Yuhao turned and entered a string of alleys, and an enormous structure quickly appeared in front of him. It was a warehouse that stored food. Granaries were imperative for any city, because they fed the city's citizens and the army. For a large city like Heaven-Do City, at least 10 such granaries had to be kept full to sustain everyone's daily necessities. At the same time, these granaries could also be used in the case of a siege. Only granaries could satisfy the Ice Bear King, Big Mao, and Second Mao. Huo Yuhao didn't bother with whether the food was tasty or not. The granaries were guarded very tightly. People that intended to cause destruction would normally start by burning granaries, because that was the easiest way to start chaos. The granaries were heavily guarded, but that was for normal people. These defenses didn't count for much against powerful individuals like Huo Yuhao and the Ice Bear King. They had the protection of imitation, as a bear and a man strode openly into the granary's periphery. They would run into oscillation detectors and thermal detectors if they went further inside. On the continent, these two kinds of soul tools combined, in addition to spiritual detectors, was considered a foolproof surveillance combination. Therefore, places with these surveillance soul tools installed were typically very confident in their defenses. Spiritual detectors were expensive and not very practical, so such places would normally not be equipped with any. Most places were equipped with the other two kinds of detectors. Huo Yuhao relied on spiritual detection, and stopped accurately outside the surveillance soul tool's maximum range. Afterwards, he used his spiritual power and opened it like an enormous web over the entire granary. There was no surveillance without any loopholes. That was especially so for a place like this granary. Granaries were very important to normal citizens and soldiers alike, but they weren't as important to soul masters and soul engineers. Therefore, there were oscillation detectors and thermal detectors around them, but they only covered a certain part of this granary. Finding their way in would be easy once they found a gap. Huo Yuhao wrapped around the main door and stepped towards the side of the granary before he snuck in with the Ice Bear King. Little Bai was clearly very hesitant when they were about to squeeze through the window, because he was too fat and really couldn't fit. Solving that problem was very simple. Huo Yuhao stored him temporarily in the spectral demiplane before he went through the window by himself. Heaven-Do City's granaries were truly quite big. Grains and wheat were piled like mountains inside, along with all kinds of preserved and dried meat that could be kept for a long time. Grains were suitable for anyone, while the meat was more suitable for the army. Huo Yuhao found a corner that wouldn't attract any attention before he released the 3 bears. Bears were carnivores, and they weren't very interested in grains. However, the dried meat and fish immediately attracted their attention. Little Bai was too large, so he maintained his human form. Big Mao and Second Mao didn't notice him in the beginning, but those 2 dark golden terraclaw bears quickly realized something wasn't right when the 3 of them began to eat. Little Bai's mouth could immediately open and stretch to 1 square meter when he was eating, and a single piece of dried meat disappeared with each mouthful. Was this something that humans could do? Big Mao and Second Mao thought they ate very quickly, but the two of them combined were still quite some way away from how fast Little Bai was eating. Dark golden terraclaw bears were very arrogant soul beasts. They were naturally unconvinced, and thus all three bears began to compete, and stuffed themselves continuously. Huo Yuhao was standing nearby, and his mouth twitched as the dried meat that was hanging in a row disappeared at an incredible speed. Body mass and size were still directly related to appetite. Reality proved that Big Mao and Second Mao were working very hard, but they were still a far cry from Little Bai. Big Mao and Second Mao had spent a long time eating all sorts of precious herbs and plants at the Icefire Yin-Yang well, and they were growing very quickly. However, the taste of herbs and plants was far too unpalatable compared to meat. They unleashed their potential more than usual because of this rare opportunity to eat meat. 15 minutes passed, and they quickly had their fill before they patted their round tummies and lay down on the floor, where they refused to move. On the other hand, the Ice Bear King was still there, as he took his food seriously. One mouthful and 1 cubic meter of dried meat after another disappeared. Furthermore, judging by the way he looked, he didn't even chew his food. Little Bai was having the time of his life. The extreme north had always had a scarcity of food. No matter how peaceful the soul beasts there were, conflicts were still inevitable from time to time. Such conflicts usually happened because of the need to eat. Someone at the Ice Bear King's level naturally wouldn't have to worry about eating. However, he was long since sick and tired of eating the same things every day. This was his first time in the human world. The human world's hustle and bustle had already moved him, and the dried meat and fish that humans made were extremely delicious. How could he hold back? 1 hour went by before the Ice Bear King had his fill. More than a third of the dried meat inside the granary had disappeared. Huo Yuhao only made his move at this moment, and he used his extra-large storage soul tool to store the rest of the dried meat. He could feed those bears for 2 or 3 meals with that. Feeding bears was truly a difficult task. They had their fill, and Huo Yuhao sent all 3 bears into his spectral demiplane to rest. This time, he didn't even erect any borders. With the Ice Bear King around, his aura itself would ward off most of the undead creatures. Little Bai changed back into his original body once they entered the spectral demiplane. Big Mao and Second Mao immediately grew silent, when they were still wondering why Little Bai could eat so much. They were all bears, and while the dark golden terraclaw bear's bloodline was considered superior to that of the ice bears, the Ice Bear King was so much older than they were. He was as powerful as a savage beast. Therefore, the 2 little bears naturally became little brothers to the big bear. The Ice Bear King loved these 2 little bears. He had countless little brothers back in the extreme north, and now that he finally had little brothers to boss around after he left, how could he not be happy? Huo Yuhao didn't care about how the 3 bears were messing around inside his spectral demiplane, as he snuck out of the granary and went towards the city center. Huo Yuhao had to find evil soul masters if he wanted to get any information about the Holy Ghost Church. He realized when he was scouting earlier that many soul masters inhabited Heaven Do City's royal palace, which had originally belonged to the Heavenly Soul Empire. There were quite a few with formidable soul power undulations amongst them. Huo Yuhao paused as he came near the royal palace, and he turned around as he turned into a relatively darker street by the side. He turned a few more corners, and then vanished into a shadowy corner. Huo Yuhao didn't attempt to enter the royal palace directly. There were many powerful individuals here, and the palace's defenses were undoubtedly the tightest. He would likely run into some spiritual barriers if he went in too hastily. If he was discovered, he couldn't be sure if there were powerful soul masters who were adept with spiritual power. Huo Yuhao concentrated his spiritual power, and he channeled his ultimate ice soul power to readjust his body's temperature. His body temperature quickly became one with the air around him, and he squinted a little as he used spiritual detection on the royal palace once more. This time, he was entirely concealed with imitation. Huo Yuhao had many formidable offensive soul skills, using his ultimate ice, or his spiritual power. However, he only had one true divine skill in his arsenal, and that was imitation. Imitation allowed him to conceal himself, and he could even change the way he looked. In addition to the support from his powerful spiritual power, he could devise entirely unpredictable and mutable battle tactics. Huo Yuhao's imitation and Shu Sanxi's Xuanwu displacement could both be said to be divine skills that were complementary to their martial souls. Huo Yuhao's other soul skills were important, but they were relatively less important than imitation, because his other soul skills could be substituted with other soul skills. Huo Yuhao's spiritual power entered the royal palace once more, and he quickly locked onto a small lake near him. This lake was undoubtedly man-made, and its water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. It wasn't very deep, barely more than a meter, and there were many exotic flowers and plants growing around the lakeside. This was like a garden inside the palace. This dark and shady corner where Huo Yuhao chose to hide himself evidently wasn't a casual choice. He came to this place because he was eyeing this lake beforehand. There were soldiers patrolling the royal palace, but the chances that they would patrol this secluded corner were a lot lower. After all, there were many soul tools monitoring this area, and the patrols were comparatively targeted at blind spots and the most important places. This is the place. Huo Yuhao activated his Eye of Destiny and strengthened his spiritual detection once more. He adjusted his senses to their most sensitive states as he observed everything that was happening around the lakeside. Only when he confirmed that there was nothing wrong around the lakeside did he jump over the wall and enter the royal palace. The royal palace's walls were almost completely covered by oscillation detectors and thermal detectors. The opportunity that Huo Yuhao chose to enter was right after an oscillation detector swept over. These oscillation detectors rotated horizontally, and Huo Yuhao could never discover their rhythm without spiritual detection. He was making perfect use of this rhythm in this moment. Following that short window of time after he jumped over the wall, he dashed and arrived by the lakeside with a few ups and downs before he discreetly submerged himself in the lake's water. None of the surveillance soul tool would target the water, and that was the reason why he was absolutely safe there. Furthermore, Huo Yuhao could do a lot of things underwater. Huo Yuhao held his breath as he controlled his body to sink to the lake bed. The water wasn't deep, and if it wasn't already dark, he could be very easily discovered within the clear and transparent water, but discovering him under the cover of darkness was far too difficult. Huo Yuhao's eyes gradually shone with pale blue colors after entering the water, and the temperature around him swiftly began to decline. This small lake's surface area was about 500 square meters, and it was considered exceptionally scenic. Under Huo Yuhao's control, the lower layer of the lake water began to turn into ice. In normal low temperatures, ice would definitely begin to form from the surface before it would spread downward. That was because ice had lower density, and would thus appear on the surface of the water. However, ice began to spread from the bottom of the lake under Huo Yuhao's forceful control. Furthermore, the ice was secured to the lake bed, and this caused the low temperatures to spread from the bottom up. A thick layer of ice appeared after some time, and the ice stopped forming when it was about 10 centimeters away from the surface. Huo Yuhao's body emerged from the surface, and he discreetly hid himself in a corner that wouldn't be scanned by any surveillance soul tools. From the outside, the lake was still full of water, and the water's surface was still very calm. But anybody jumping into the lake would realize that the water was only 10 centimeters deep, and everything below that was solid ice. Only Huo Yuhao could achieve this level of control. Furthermore, he managed to vary the solid ice's temperature in different areas, and that was something that typical people couldn't accomplish. If the temperature above the ice was too low, then the 10 centimeters right below the water's surface would quickly turn into ice as well. Huo Yuhao's plan would be foiled if a patrolling soldier saw everything. On the other hand, if the ice's temperature was too high, then the ice would be quickly melted by the water around it, and Huo Yuhao wouldn't be able to do what he wanted. Therefore, he had to control the ice's temperature very delicately. Huo Yuhao's understanding towards ice and water had become a lot deeper over the past weeks, and his control over ice and water became a lot easier and more casual. Huo Yuhao wasn't in a hurry to leave. He lay prostrate on the surface of the ice, and he pressed his left hand underwater as he held a milk bottle in his right hand. He absorbed soul power from the milk bottle as he continuously channeled ice explosion into the ice beneath the water. Huo Yuhao could detonate any kind of ice. However, only ice that was infused with ice explosion would possess the greatest explosiveness. He had used this method back then to surprise even the darkness holy dragon, Long Xiao Yao. That was enough to show how formidable ice explosion was. This was also an attack that couldn't be directly used, yet was almost considered a divine skill, which had an importance second only to imitation. Huo Yuhao continued for a full 15 minutes before he stopped. He moved, and continued the same act. The lake's surface was a little big for ice explosion, and infusing ice explosion into just one spot wouldn't achieve the desired strength. Another 15 minutes passed before Huo Yuhao stood back up, and he used spiritual detection to open a path as he snuck deep into the royal palace. The colors of these 9 soul rings were very weird. 2 of them were yellow, 2 of them were purple, and 5 were black. It was an ordinary combination of colors, but each soul ring had a blurry layer of color on it. This caused the original, bright colors of the soul rings to become much dimmer. This was especially so for the 5 black soul rings. If not for the fact that they could be compared to the pitch-black clothing he was in, the difference in their colors might actually be overlooked. Without a doubt, this elder was a titled Doluor, whereas the frail man in black was actually surrounded by a layer of distorted light. Traces of yellow, purple and black could be seen, but it was unclear how many soul rings he possessed. The 2 figures quickly chased in a specific direction. Very soon, they came to the small lakeside that Huo Yuhao had used to hide. While the Heavenly Soul Empire's imperial palace was very expansive, that was mainly because of the structures in the palace. For powerful soul masters like Huo Yuhao, they quickly came to the boundaries of the palace as they unleashed their full strength. Huo Yuhao was above the lake. If he moved forward any further, he would be within the range of the surveillance soul tools surrounding the palace. His spiritual detection was still in use. Due to his all-around detection earlier, he clearly knew where all the spiritual barriers were. Right now, he just needed to move his spiritual detection around those 3 spiritual barriers, and the entire palace would basically be under his detection. He naturally discovered the 2 people that were chasing him. The 2 of them were very quick. That elder was a titled Doluor. As for the other man, Huo Yuhao was unable to clearly tell. However, the other guy had to at least be an advanced tier soul Doluor if he wasn't a titled Doluor, judging from his spiritual undulations. Evil Soul Master. A cold grin surfaced at the corner of Huo Yuhao's lips. Following this, he charged straight towards a wall of the palace. At this moment, he seemed not to care about being discovered by the surveillance soul tools. Ring ring ring. Deafening alarms sounded in the next moment. The entire palace was alarmed. Beams of light subtly appeared in the sky. Evidently, the aerial surveillance soul tools were scanning in this direction. Not only this, beams of soul rays started to surface from above the palace walls. They were all sweeping towards his direction. The Sun Moon Empire did well in erecting a defense as strong as this, even though they had only occupied the Heavenly Soul Empire for a short period of time. A cold and mysterious look appeared on Huo Yuhao's face. He twisted his body in the air before his soul thruster lit up. Instantly, he charged towards the streets outside the palace. He unleashed his imitation, and immediately disappeared. Even if there were oscillation detectors, they still needed time to adjust and come over. By the time they arrived, Huo Yuhao would be long gone. It was impossible to follow him directly, given that his imitation was in use. 2 figures were also chasing him at great speed. Just as they flew above the lake, tremendous booms sounded. Boom. The entire lake seemed to have been mined with countless bombs. A terrifying explosion ensued, and almost the entire Heaven Do city could hear them. Amidst the resonating booms, the lake became the most frightening explosive. Countless ice flakes flew everywhere, and the immense explosive force blew apart the layer of ice that had formed on the surface of the lake. This explosion was too sudden. There weren't any clues before it happened. When it occurred, the frail man in black and the elder were both astonished. They were both pure soul masters, thus they didn't have any automatic defensive soul tools on them. When the explosion occurred, they could only subconsciously circulate their soul power to resist it. Both their bodies were instantly flung high up into the air. The frightening explosive force continued to surge upwards, as the lake instantly expanded to 5 times its original size. The huge structures around it were immediately taken down by this explosion. Even the wide and thick palace walls collapsed. The strength of this explosion was equivalent to an all-out attack from an ice-type titled Doluo. Although Huo Yuhao was a soul sage, he had been accumulating power there for almost an hour. He had drained a lot of his soul power before he completed his ice explosion technique. In addition, he had frozen the lake water into ice beforehand. The entire process took a lot of effort. He wanted to achieve a result just like this. The surrounding distorted lights around the frail soul master disappeared following the explosion, revealing his 8 soul rings. He was already coughing up blood in the air. When Huo Yuhao had escaped earlier, he sneakily stuck close to the lake's surface as he flew. For this frail soul master to follow his spiritual trail, he naturally had to follow Huo Yuhao's escape route closely. This was why both of them were almost at the center of the explosion, and were sent high up into the air by Huo Yuhao's ice explosion technique. The elder was faring much better, given that he was a titled Doluo. Although he was caught unawares, he still relied on his abilities to neutralize most of the impact. The other soul master wasn't so fortunate. He was only a soul Doluo, and he was a spiritual type soul master. He wasn't adept at defense. As a result, he was immediately hurt critically by the explosion. His legs were blown off, and his soul power also became very messy in his body. The excruciating pain caused his aura to turn into a huge mess. He was already screaming tragically in the air. Blood was flowing from his pores. Fortunately, his cultivation was rather strong, which saved his life. If he were only a soul sage, he would have lost his life to Huo Yuhao's accumulated ice explosion technique. This video will end here. The various surveillance soul tools on the royal palace's outer layer were greatest in number, and also the most sensitive. After all, prevention was better than a cure, and there were much fewer surveillance soul tools in the palace's inner regions. There were many people inside the royal palace, so surveillance soul tools weren't that practical. These soul tools would only become effective if they were searching for someone under certain special circumstances. If that happened, handheld surveillance soul tools would be sufficient. Huo Yuhao continued secretly into the royal palace. He would stop every once in a while to inspect everything around him closely before continuing. At this point, he was most afraid of the formless spiritual barriers, and even he could only detect spiritual barriers from a close distance away. If his spiritual power touched a spiritual barrier, the person who was controlling the spiritual barrier would directly locate his position if they were strong enough. Fortunately, spiritual barriers weren't common at all. Huo Yuhao was about 1/3 of his way in as he pushed forward, and he still hadn't discovered any spiritual barriers. Huo Yuhao paused, and he stood in a dimly lit region between 2 pavilions. He briefly replenished his soul power, and readjusted his spiritual power, so that he was in peak condition before his eyes started to glow. Faint rose-gold colors flickered, and his eye of destiny opened on his forehead. All 3 of his eyes were radiating rose-gold hues, and that was especially so inside his eye of destiny, as a black whirlpool could be faintly seen. That was Huo Yuhao's spiritual soul core, that belonged to his spirit eyes. People who were familiar with him would immediately understand, after witnessing him in this state, that Huo Yuhao was about to use a spiritual type soul skill with his full strength. Huo Yuhao unleashed spiritual detection to its highest possible level in the next moment, and it spread in all directions with his body at the center. It only took a few blinks of the eye before he encompassed the entire palace. The reason why he had to go deep into the palace was because of this. It would be harder to lock down his position if he was inside the palace, and the reason why he did this was to startle and alert his enemies. At the same time, he wanted to see if the Sun Moon Empire had installed any spiritual barriers inside the Heavenly Soul Empire's imperial palace. If they did, the place in which they did so had to be the most important. Either an important figure or object was bound to be there. He wasn't afraid of being discovered. He was confident in his ability to flee this place quickly. He instantly unleashed his spiritual detection, and a 3-dimensional structure of the entire palace appeared in his head. He squinted his eyes and sensed the slight changes around him. He also fully imprinted the three-dimensional structure of the palace in his mind using his immense spiritual power. This would be important for his next visit here. Indeed, just like he had expected, he detected 3 places where spiritual powers interacted. This meant that there were spiritual barriers in those 3 places. Those 3 places were all located near the center of the palace. However, no alarm sounded. The palace was very quiet, as if the spiritual barriers that had been touched didn't have any effect at all. Huo Yuhao wasn't complacent at all. After detecting for 3 seconds, he instantly shut off his spiritual detection. At the same time, he quickly unleashed his spiritual interference domain, and used his spiritual avatar to leave behind a streak of his spiritual power to maintain his spiritual interference where he was. He instantly teleported 50 meters away before fleeing in a direction that he had identified earlier. He had found out many things after that brief period of spiritual detection. Indeed, a few seconds after he teleported away, 2 black figures had already silently come to where he was. A huge black web, carrying a slightly fishy smell, fell from the sky and instantly engulfed the streak of spiritual power that Huo Yuhao left behind. His spiritual power immediately dissipated and disappeared. His spiritual interference domain also vanished, and everything turned dark once again. What? A slightly surprised sound resonated. Following this, 2 figures fell to the ground. What's going on? There's no one. An elderly-sounding voice was heard. The other person was also puzzled and said, "This shouldn't be the case. Earlier, I sensed that the person unleashing his spiritual power was over here. I can't be wrong. This person's spiritual power was strong. He might be a spiritual type titled Doluo. I didn't expect someone as strong as him among the remaining losers in the Heavenly Soul Empire. However, he's very sensitive. After discovering our spiritual barrier, he quickly fled. But it's not so easy for him to flee." The voice of this person talking was very sharp, but their gender was unclear. His frail figure was concealed by a black veil. The person beside him was a tall and large elder. His sinister gaze was still flashing amidst the darkness. He had long, grayish hair that flowed behind his back, while his burly figure was also concealed by his black clothing. There was an image of a ball of white flame on their chests. "Come, let's follow his spiritual aura to find him. He can't escape." The frail man in black snorted coldly, and a deep purple halo was released from his body. This halo was like an oscillation, as it spread outward. During this process, slight oscillations appeared in the direction that Huo Yuhao had escaped from earlier. "Oh? This fellow seems to be able to teleport. I only discovered traces of him 50 meters away. It's a pity that it's me. HMPH. Let's go and chase him." As he spoke, the frail man in black immediately leaped up and charged into the sky like a bolt of lightning. He pursued Huo Yuhao in the direction that he had escaped in. The other elder followed closely behind him with his toes touching the ground. He let out intense white light from his body. At the same time, 9 soul rings rose from beneath his feet.